Hi and welcome back to Mandibil. I'm going to quickly carry on with the deconstruction of this video. Not too much small talk in the beginning, as I'm, maybe a little accustomed to talking about various shit that doesn't really matter too much to you, probably, right? But just to clarify, I've cleaned up my list over here a bit and shortened T, true and false to T and F, in order for myself to have a better overview of what we're dealing with here, right? And I make a list of terms used and then a list of terms combined, you could say, and possible definitions and so on down here, right? It might need to be optimized a bit, this list, but never mind, right? Another thing, when I listen through the videos that are in the series, that I think the recent one, something that I didn't, spot because my mind was somewhere else, right? But he says, and it would, I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of, it would be nice if we could get to a definition of true and false and propositions and so on, so that we can teach our children, right? That's the thing that I am fearing, that both is the problem of why people can't get to any idea of truth or any settlement of truth. They might have an idea where it might be, but then there's some other things that doesn't fit the picture because it's another category. All these things I have delved into through this deconstruction, right? But what it ultimately ends up being, something about telling your children. That's the power they want with propositions. Propositions has to carry truth, so I can inflict truth on my children, right? Be careful. Because your children have to experience themselves what it is you claim to know. You can't say, I know this, therefore I can inflict in knowledge on you, my child, or your child, right? He uses the term our children. I don't like that idea of our children. Is his children my children also? I don't care about your, I'm not saying I'm not caring about your children, but I don't want your children's future to be inflicted on me. Your children is your children, my children are my children, right? So please keep these things separate, right? It's just so we can teach our children. This is the academic mantra, right? It's all about I wouldn't say power, but it's close, right? Parents need to be in control of what it means to know and what it means to be certain and all that, because if they don't extend themselves as being certain and being knowledgeable and being the greatest philosophers of all time, which is kind of grandiose, right? Without doing any kind of legwork in that direction. But otherwise, it's an old problem all the way back to Socrates. He was the first one who started to challenge, the status quo, so to say, right? Culture and all that bullshit, the cave analogy and all that, right? People are being force-fed stories, and that's what he wants to do. He wants to chain you to the wall down in the cave. We can teach our children, right? Mont Blanc is more than 4,000 because my professor said so, right? And he is a truth carrier. Fuck off. Okay, with that out of the way, I rewound a bit here so that we sort of can recapture the last bit he said, so I can carry on to the next timestamp, right? Okay, let's go.
To say about matters of Phrygian interpretation.
Oh yeah, before we get in, I have reset. First of all, I thought when I started this, side story, right? I thought my camera was completely dead because when I fired it up, it was black. The screen was black. But then I sort of started to fiddle about, maybe there's a loose connection. And I saw there was some picture on there. I said, what the hell was that? Then I turned it around and then very light, when I turned it toward the sun, there was something on the screen. So I just reset it and there was the picture, right? So I don't know what the hell it's doing. But now I have set to default standard and I've only changed sort of the going into manual mode to just make sure that it doesn't change focus, doesn't change gain, doesn't change brightness, anything. Just stay there and stay there, right? So I hope it'll work now, right? So, okay. Also, I have it's an old desktop computer, this one. So if the sound may disappear at some point, sometimes when I boot up, there's no sound, and then I have to, wiggle the cable to the speakers, and then the sound reappears, right? So it's an old one, so bear with me if shit happens, right? Okay, let's dig in.
And did my PhD thesis on the topic. That's not my intention here, so I'll resist the urge to get distracted. My point in bringing up frege was to show that the belief that facts are true thoughts has some weighty precedent. There are few philosophers as insightful and respected as frege, so the view should not be dismissed lightly. But this video is not a simple appeal to authority, no matter how weighty that authority may be. So I first need to argue against the alternative views before I return to frege's one and develop it further. For now, let's take what we've discussed as giving us good reasons to think that truth bearers are thoughts. And let's now turn our attention to the other important entities, the truth makers.
Yeah, but he just brought it in out of nowhere. This is my criticism, this kind of midstream philosophy. I'm going to talk about truth, and now I have truth bearers and truth makers, right? What are those? You just mentioned a lot of shit like facts and things and world and mind, reality, existence, truth, thought, certainty, belief, and so on. How do these things correspond to that thing you just brought in? Truth bearer and truth maker. No, but that's what I was told when I went to university, right? So they must have been truth bearers and told me about truth bearers. So now it's true that they're truth bearers, right? Oh, man.
Most theories of truth, unlike frege's, take facts.
You can't have a theory of truth. Because in order to create a theory, you need to observe shit, right? It's this delusion of where terms are being used. It just goes to show, in my opinion, my personal opinion is that the last 100 years of academic philosophy, because it has become an academic endeavor, all sorts of weird people have become philosophers, and all sorts of mentally abstract gymnastics have deluded clear thinking. It has blown it out of the water. The best example possibly would be metaethics. That is so crazy. At this point, it's a diagram the size of the universe, basically, right? How these abstract thinkers can blow things out of the water without getting anywhere. They can complicate it and say, okay, now I complicated a bit. Now I can dig myself into this trench and, wind myself up in this sort of cloud castles of abstractions about terms and how to understand them, right? Sort of living in the abstract balloon and have left reality. No wonder that modern academic philosophy has a bad name, because it's like, a philosopher, they're just there to confuse you and, ask you weird questions, right? Yeah.
To be the truth makers and not the truth bearers. The idea is that a proposition is true when it corresponds to a fact. So facts play the role of the end.
Yeah, but you haven't defined what is a fact. Because don't you have to know something that is actually true in order for it to be a fact? Then you can't turn the carriage around, the cart around, and put the horse in the behind and say, because I have a fact, now I can get to truth, and because I have truth, now I have a fact. It's sort of this circularity of linguistics. It doesn't lead anywhere, this. At this point, this is just linguistic mumbo jumbo, right? It will take a bit of a miracle to turn this around to good, clear philosophy.
At the level of existence that determine whether or not a proposition, or what I will now refer to as a thought, is true.
But yeah, a proposition is using language, right? Some kind of language, whether that be or using your voice, or using smoke signals, or writings, or whatever you can think of, right? Bongo drums. That's a proposition. It can't be a thought. You might have a thought that you then sort of extract or condense into a sentence that you could call a proposition, possibly, if it fits the right mold for being a proposition. So these are numbers. Now I'm just calling it a thought. But what is a thought? All of these things are thoughts, right? A fact is a thought. A thing is a thought. It's some kind of thought. Maybe not a cognition, maybe not a qualia, but some kind of abstraction or idea or imagination or something like that, right? An abstraction of some kind. That would be a thought. Something going on in mind is a thought. So now you're broadening the term to basically be anything you want by calling it a thought. I really don't like this, and it's what I pointed to, I think in my last chapter, was that when you do this kind of midstream philosophy, it compounds and compounds and compounds and compounds. We have entities that are abstract, mental, and physical. So there's a trichotomy of, right? Where is that? Is an entity, is a thought also an entity? And can that thought be abstract, mental, and physical? And how does all these pieces fit together? Again, it's sort of a juggler throwing up words that oh my god, this sounds, oh what a fantastic word, now I'm pulling down that word, throwing up another word, right? Oh, look at that fancy word, right? And then say, Russell and Frege and Wittgenstein and
oh. If a thought corresponds to a fact, it is true. And if a thought doesn't correspond to a fact, it is false.
Yeah, but what is a fact then? Right? You haven't, as far as I can see, you can say a thought is a fact. Or a fact is a thought. I think I turned it around, right? A true thought is a fact. So fact is a true thought. Well, so you're comparing a thought to a thought then. I'm kind of losing overview of what you're doing because it's not very well structured. This, even if I try to make this, list, what would you call it? This, notepad over here, right? Trying to keep track of what you're saying. I'm still not confident that I understand what you're saying. And you could say, hey, that's just because you're not a doctor, right? You're just one of the peasants who have to pay taxes so I can go to university and get my doctor's degree. So I don't have to go and do manual labor, but I can sit here and sound fancy, right?
Going back to Aristotle's original idea of truth as saying of what is that it is, we now get the more precise idea of truth as expressing a thought that corresponds to a fact. Simple. This conception of truth is highly...
Simple? Simple? After 21 minutes and 30 seconds. It's simple. I have, thrown 10, 20 words at you. And, true thoughts are facts. And then there's truth bearers and truth makers. Right? And truth is a relationship between two kinds of things. And a proposition is a sentence that can be true or false. So there's sentences that are propositions and the relationship between two kinds of things. Right? And there's a true maker, a true bearer, and true thoughts. And
highly intuitive. Suppose we were to use it to say why the thought that the sky is blue is true. The correspondence to fact.
I might want to recap my stance on this proposition thing, right? Because it seems to be that he needs to do some foundational philosophy so that I understand what he means by various shit that he brings to the fray when he does this kind of philosophy. There's all sorts of philosophy, more foundational philosophy that should be in place so that I know the vocabulary he's using to refer to various shit in his potential ontology, right? You can't carry over somebody else's ontology and just start using terms without you having done the footwork to create your ontology. At least state what other kind of ontology you're using and how it's put together and what these various terms mean. So you don't end up in all sorts of linguistic circularities that are synonymous maybe, but because they're different terms, people might think they're different aspects that are maybe the same. If a thought is a fact, then why are you using two terms then? Why are you not just saying facts or thoughts? So it needs to be more clear, this, right? Maybe down there is some thinking that is decent, but it's not possible to follow it, right? I mean, I'm not ruling out that I might be too stupid to follow this big thing here, right? But in order to clarify what I mean, I think you need to understand why you need to propose something. Why do you need something to be classified as true? And why do you need knowledge? And why are you talking about all this when you explain idealism? Because in my opinion, all that which you have been doing now is actually epistemology. It's clarifications of what you mean by knowing, or actually maybe even how do you go about using that which you have classified as knowledge? Can I propose it? Is knowledge true? Is knowledge a fact? And where do we use all these terms in this sort of going about proposing what we know, right? So I would say, if you want to propose something, that which you can propose is that which can be known. And why do you need something to be known? Well, I would say what you know is that which you can agree upon with somebody else. That's why you need knowledge. You wouldn't care too much about propositions and truth and all that if you were, as I said, sat alone on a deserted island. You would just sort of, they wouldn't make any difference if you were mute or right? So you need knowledge because that is what can be agreed upon in a binary way with somebody else. Either it's an elephant or it's not an elephant. Either it's a coconut or not a coconut, right? So it makes sense for me to make cognitions knowledge. Because they can either be there or not there. Either I'm experiencing football or I'm not experiencing football in that particular aspect of my experience, right? So if there's football, I know football in that particular space of my experience. I can agree with somebody else on it, right? Seemingly. When I point, they can point, and so on, right? It seems functional to me. So what I propose is that which I know. I don't propose it if I'm alone, but I might want to agree with somebody whether or not that is, a mammoth, or and we can, work together to hunt it down, right? But what makes it true? It's not true by itself. There's no truth embedded in an elephant, right? It's when I make the proposition that is an elephant, and I make the proposition to be in agreement with one or more other individuals. Then I point and say, that's the elephant we're going to hunt. Do you agree, right? Yeah, that's a true proposition. You're not going to say it that way, but that's what is embedded in the language, right? So, if I make that proposition, or somebody else make the proposition, it doesn't really matter who makes the proposition. If there's a proposition about a certain aspect that we are pointing to, then that proposition is either true or false to me. I can only know whether that proposition is true or false to me. If somebody else says that's a true proposition, I can only base that statement of true or false from them by comparing it to my own status of me comparing that particular proposition with my experience. If that experience is true to me, and they point and say that's true, that's an elephant, I mean, I would possibly be willing to, go in agreement with we should hunt down that elephant, right? But they might be lying, but then I'm experiencing elephant, right? If they're not experiencing elephant, it would be very weird, right? But the truth is, you are the carrier of that truth, in the sense that you're the one who has to make the comparison between your experience and that particular proposition. Now, what does it take then to be a good proposition? Well, you have to reference what you know, or what can be known. So there's a connection between epistemology and truth and fact and propositions. They have to hang together somehow, right? That's the only way I can see it, get it to work. And not that it's sort of, I'm forcing it in my philosophy. It makes perfect sense that that's the way you do it. Because when you go to the refrigerator and want to, if you agree with your spouse that you're going to eat the Greek yogurt and not the Turkish yogurt, then you will have to sort of be in alignment with that kind of, proposition or agreement, right? So would you propose, okay, if you don't know which one it is, that you identify two yogurts, right? Then say, is this the Greek yogurt and is this the Turkish yogurt, right? You see, it's based on cognitions, right? That's not, when you open the fridge, that's not truth. There's something like sentences floating or thoughts floating around in there, right? Oh my God, there's a truth bearer in the kitchen.
Theory says that this thought is true because there exists some object, the sky, that has the property of being blue. The blueness of the sky is an existing fact, and it is by corresponding to this.
But so now qualia can be a fact. Is that how it is? Because something that is blue is not necessarily a sky, right? But a sky is a sky. An elephant is an elephant. An elephant is not something else. But something can be blue that is not an elephant or a sky, right? It could be a blueberry. Or, whatever else you can think of that could be blue, right? So qualia are not good things to be called facts. And what about at night? Is the sky blue there? It's black to me, right? So this is bad. It's really, really crappy philosophy, this, right?
This fact, that the thought that the sky is blue is true. So facts then, according to...
Why is it? What makes it true? It's a true thought? Hang on. Well, it sounds circular. You're saying you have an experience of blue and you cognize it as sky, right? There's also some white there, some gray, but never mind. What makes it true? It's something you add to the picture. I don't experience any true over there, right? Yeah, is it true that it's blue, right? Are you comparing it? It should be blue. Because I have prior experiences of that sky, and it's blue, and because it's also blue now, therefore it must be true. That doesn't work. You can't tap into a memory of something and then use that to control whether or not you should or should not be experiencing this and call it true or false. If that's what you're doing, I'm not sure. Existing fact, so no. It's completely misguided, this, right?
That the thought that the sky is blue is true. So facts then, according to this...
But what is the thought now, right? It's too fluffy to just talk about thoughts, right? It seems that you're making things fluffy because you're not sure what you're doing. So you're diluting the terms into being so expansive that I can't pin down what you're talking about, right? A thought is just a too fluffy term. Anything can possibly be a thought, right?
This theory are structured entities that exist in reality.
Okay, so now you're talking again about reality without clarifying what is reality and what does it mean it exists. Now you're a materialist, aren't you? I mean, there's an external world that is settled and, I'm just tapping into it, but it's never changing and settled and eternal and, no.
They consist of objects and their properties in relations.
That's just the story you're working from. You have a story about an external world you haven't clarified how you got to. That reality must be an external world that is not your thought then, right? So you're comparing your thought to some external world that you somehow have access to without clarifying how you have access to it. And if it's external to your thoughts or your mind or whatever you want to call it, then how do you get to it? If all you have access to is your mind, how can you fabulate about something that is beyond that mind? Can you clarify how you get to that? Or is it just an imagination? And imagination doesn't make it so, right? If I imagine, some aspect of something beyond those hills, doesn't make it so just because I imagine it. If I had been sitting in this room all my life and I imagine there are yellow unicorns outside, doesn't make it so, right? You have to experience it, and if you experience it, it's a part of that inside then, right? And if it's outside your experience, it's always outside your experience, it's never inside. How do you get to that outside? That you're sort of this settled, objective, that's not a term he's been using, right? But things in reality, objects. I think he's actually used the term object, so we need to add that term also. Didn't he say object? I'll have to rewind a bit.
Basically, consist of are structured entities that exist in reality. They consist of objects and their properties in
Object plus their properties. Right? So, now even more stuff, right?
relations. Basically, they're entities like the things Russell described propositions as being. But in this new theory, facts are not propositions at all. They are entities that exist outside of language, outside of meaning. This idea of
outside language, so now we also have language, right? And when people start to talk about language outside and something else he mentioned, I forget this relational thing, outside and inside, right? That's relative to something else. What is that inside that is confined to not being on the outside? What part of these are outside or inside, and how does he get to that dichotomy? If he's on an inside, then he does not have access to an outside. How does he get to an outside? It must be an imagination then, right? But an imagination doesn't create existences of any kind, right? Or if it does, let me know how, right? Because in my opinion, that's ridiculous. It is extremely convoluted now, right? He's not concerned about rigidity. He might think this is rigid, right? But look at it. Look at this list here, man, right? And it's building a case for idealism. It's like he's He has a theory that this is, and I'm building a case, which is usually doing, empiricism. Building a case, right? I'm building a case that you're the murderer of that guy over there, right? So what are you going to do? You're finding evidence or asking people if they saw this or saw that, right? You're building a case, going into epistemology, a case for metaphysics / ontology called idealism, by going into epistemology that is not settled in any of your videos as far as I can see, right? I'm not buying this, right?
Truth seems reasonable enough, especially when we're talking about observations like the blueness of the sky or the height of Mont Blanc, but it's not quite as intuitive as it first seems. If this is indeed the theory of truth that we adopt, it should be our theory of truth in all circumstances, across all cases, and not just the cases when we're talking about things we can observe. For example, what about truth?
Why doesn't it have to be all cases? What is that? This is important, right? I think that's the problem of trying to get to an idea of truth and facts and existence and propositions, because he needs anything that he wants to be authority to be able to be proposed, right? I can propose a theory of gravity and I can make a case for it, and therefore it is true now, settled, right? The earth is the center of the universe. Epicycles, therefore it's settled, right? You don't do philosophy like that, right? You're having some kind of semi-scientific approach to it by trying to build a case. That's not what you do. You kind of apparently think that you have to argue for why you have a good philosophy. No, you create a philosophy that works for you. You're the one who has to check whether or not it's good, because you have to live by it, right? It's not about convincing somebody else that you have a good case for idealism, right? That's polemic. That is intellectual mumbo jumbo. We are sitting here discussing it because we like to sit here drinking cafe latte and discuss some fancy shit, right? No, a philosophy is about your experience and your life and so on. So if you have a philosophy, present the whole of the philosophy, take it step by step. I didn't do that because I didn't have it, but I have never said that you should follow my philosophy, right? Or try to build a case for my whatever. Start from the beginning. And how do you do that, right? How do you get to do some metaphilosophy? What are you actually trying to do here, right? What does it mean to do all this shit? Why do you need all this, right? Why do you need truth, facts, and existence, and idealism, and all that? Why do you need it? What is it there for, right? Are you just extending that you went to university and want to make a channel and want to be famous or whatever, right? Or are you actually trying to build a functional philosophy you can live by, right? So then when you go to the grocery store or your refrigerator, you can actually apply this thinking somehow, right? The thing he says that everything I need to be able to classify in a sort of a way that I can teach my children, right, has to be able to be proposed. So now he's lumping all sorts of categories of shit together in a pile, and that can then be proposed. No, that won't work, because there's possibly a hierarchy of within your experiential realm, or the experiences you can refer to, have direct access to, that are interdependent. You won't have the elephant without having a color, a sound, a taste, a touch, a smell, right? If you don't have any of these, you don't have an elephant, in any case, right? So maybe you should look down at an ontology and create the structure to make sure that you're not just lumping all sorts of weird experiences together and say, now I know it's blue, and I know that's a cloud, and there's an elephant, and it's sort of and 2 + 2 is 4 is true, and the elephant is true, and blue is true, and the smell of roses is true, and no. And there is no inherent true proposition or false proposition. That's a misguided understanding of what you're doing when you're proposing. You propose in order to compare the proposition with experiences, but you only want or need a proposition when there's not only you but somebody else. You're not going around when you I suppose, when you're buying groceries and saying that's a banana and then pick it up. And that's a true tomato, pick it up, right? That's a true pasta and pick it up. You don't do that. You just experience and do, experience and do, and experience and don't do, maybe, right? You don't need to propose anything. They're not propositions, I would suppose, floating around in your mind while you're doing this, right? You're just observing and doing, observing and doing. Now, if you have to agree with your spouse when you are at the grocery store, right? And you have to agree on that pasta, right? This is the pasta. You could possibly, if it's not obvious to you, right? You're taking the chance that you're grabbing that pasta, putting in your cart, that it is the pasta you agree to, you want to buy, right? Somehow. But if you need to be in agreement, then you could propose, this is the pasta that we want. She could say, yes, that's the pasta that we want. And therefore the proposition is true to you and her, possibly. You only have her statement that it's true, right? You don't have the experience that she's having about when she's comparing that proposition to her experience. You only have your own experience to use to guide you towards whether or not this is in any kind of agreement, right? Okay.
Truths like 2 plus 2 is 4. If this is also true because it corresponds to a fact, then there must be a fact out there that consists of the number 2 in an addition relation to another number.
And there isn't, right? 2 plus 2 equals 4 is not floating out around somewhere, right? And you're just lumping a lot of things together by calling it a thought. And therefore you're trying to disparate categories. You're trying to lump them into one category called thought, so you can get around with calling all sorts of shit a fact, right? And this is sophistry, in my opinion. This is close to being sophist about it. I'm always worried when people extend categories and lump categories together, rather than saying, okay, I have this, but I'm creating 2 or 3 subcategories, and I'm only going with that subcategory because it doesn't fit with these other categories. So you're sort of condensing or digging your way down into a smaller aspect and saying, okay, this is what I'm doing, right? Now it's just a thought, right? So it's basically anything that can be a fucking fact, right? That doesn't work.
2 and somehow being equal to 4. And whatever fact this thing is, it's certainly a pretty odd one. And we're also now left with the problem of how we know it is a fact that 2 plus 2 is 4. Because if
how do you know it's a fact? How does it all of a sudden become a fact? You haven't... It's this moving the terms around, and you're never defining anything. You don't have that foundational philosophy. This is the midstream philosopher who's just throwing terms up in the air and moving them around a bit and sort of, right? Attempting to do this shell game of words.
Wasn't the thought that 2 plus 2 is 4 would be false. No matter how much it seems true to us, we could simply be mistaken. But this seems to get things backwards. Don't we just see that 2 plus 2 is 4 is true without going out and checking the facts? If anything, we know it must be a fact.
But checking the facts? Are you saying the things and objects have turned into facts all of a sudden? Checking the facts? Are you going out checking? I have to go out to the shed to check that 2 plus 2 is 4, right? Oh my god, that's stupid. Oh man, right? I'm only getting more and more confused with this guy, right? How does he get his pants on? Yeah. And maybe he doesn't have any pants, I can't tell you. But then his brown shirt, right?
The 2 plus 2 is 4, because we know that 2 plus 2 is 4.
We know. So now we settled knowledge without any clarification, right? We know that. Everybody knows that, right?
Is true. Now you might think that
we know that it's true. So there's some connection between truth and knowledge. Without any clarification here, of course, right? But we know it to be true, right? Just like Darth Vader, you know it to be true, right? No. You know it to be true. There's some connection between truth and knowledge, right? And if there is, right, in your philosophy, you need to clarify what you mean by knowing, because I think it's more important to settle what you know so you can get to truth, rather than get to truth and thereby get to knowledge, right? In this sort of a cart before the horse before the cart, switching back and forth, and it's like people are saying, I guess I'm too stupid to understand this, Oxford, whatever, right?
I've just said isn't right, and that we actually do go and check the facts to know that 2 plus 2 is 4. We might get 2 blocks and then another 2 blocks and then count to see if there are 4 blocks.
Yeah, but you are cognizing something, right? And that's the term I use, right? You are observing whatever, right? There's one here, and one there, right? And then in your mind you count to 4. There's not 4 out there. There's 4 in there then, right? In the out there is also in there. Because I'm experiencing, otherwise it couldn't be in there, right? And if it wasn't in there, I wouldn't even do anything. I'm not trying to count something I'm not experiencing, right?
But this isn't a good enough explanation. First, counting these blocks wouldn't actually allow us to say that 2 plus 2 is 4. It would only allow us to say that 2 blocks plus 2 blocks is 4 blocks. And that's not quite the same thing. The fact about blocks is a particular fact about quantities of blocks. But the mathematical claim of 2 plus 2 being 4 is a general claim that can be applied to anything. And even if it sounds plausible to think we check the facts to know...
Yeah, sure. That's also where it's an abstraction. It has nothing to do with the objects that you're counting them. It's not the object's fault that you're counting them, right? It's not an aspect of whatever object you're referring to. But what can be true is the fucking object you are trying to count. And if there's more of the same kind of cognition, like a block or whatever it was he's talking about, right? There's a block, there's a block, there's a block, there's a block. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? There's not 4 out there. There's 4 in your counting system.
Know that 2 plus 2 is 4. That's clearly not how we know other mathematical truths, like a billion...
How did you settle that mathematics can be true? It's like, I have been told it should be true. So therefore I'm just force-feeding you the idea that mathematics can be true. What is it that makes it true? Just because it's a thought doesn't necessarily make it true, right? What is this true? What is it? I mean, you have to deal with it, right?
Billion plus 6 is 1,000,000,006. We don't see that that's true by first counting out 1 billion blocks, counting out another 6, and then recounting to see if we have 1 billion plus 6. Thank goodness. And I don't know how we could, even in principle, go out to check the facts for other mathematical truths, such as that the square root of 2 is irrational. To demonstrate that, we have to first recognize a series of thoughts as being connected, and then we infer the truth of the later thoughts on the basis of the truth of the former thoughts. That's what mathematical proof is. To determine mathematical truths, you don't go out and check the facts. Now, before you think that
But then they're not true, right? I'm not saying that you can't use mathematics. That's not what I'm saying. Just because it's not true doesn't mean it's dysfunctional or not useful or should be disregarded or something like that. But you want to use this truth as a blue stamping hammer that either it's functional and perfect or it has to be disregarded if it's not true, right? That's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with personal subjective experiences and how we handle them among each other, as I'm trying to point out, right? You don't need proposition if you're sitting alone on a fucking island, right? You don't need to say that's a coconut before you eat it, or that's coconut is true, or it's carrying truth, or something like that, right? You don't need to do that. You just fucking, digest that fucking coconut, right? Or you kick it out of the water, or whatever you want to do with it, right? It's only when there's more than you, other individuals, and you need to sort of getting your way around objects, so to say, and figuring out whether or not if you have to potentially work together, right? That you all of a sudden start to need to combine communication with what you know, but you don't have access to what other people know because you don't have access to their experiences. And one way to do that, and I would say the only way to do it, is to propose what you know, or ask for somebody else to propose what they know, right? That's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with what you know and trying to get to some kind of objectivity about, two subjects getting to an agreement upon one object, right? That's objectivity, in my opinion.
Mathematical truths are some special kind of case over here, and that for all other purposes, correspondence theories of truth are perfectly fine. Think a little more about the whole host of ways that we use language descriptively, but not based on direct observation. Consider, for example, the following plausibly true thoughts. The thought that torturing babies is wrong.
So now we're doing ethics, man, or morality. Is it possibly true? But what do you mean that it's true? You can't throwing something up in the air, some arbitrary sentence and say, this is possibly true. Are you going to say it's false? So you want to torture babies, right? It's highly manipulative, this, right? Yeah, because torture, the term torture, is embedded with morality. Torture is a wrong way of treating another individual. So a wrong way of treating a baby is wrong. Yeah, obviously, because it's tautological. It's a tautology. It's an ethical or moral tautology. You're just combining wrong way of treating another individual into the word torture. And when you say torture as baby is wrong, it sounds like it's an actually decent sentence, but it isn't. Because a wrong way of treating another individual is wrong. It's a tautology. You're not actually describing what you mean by wrong. You're just creating a statement that seems to be a comparison or a descriptive sentence, but that description is embedded in the term torture. And therefore you're not describing anything. You're just saying red apple is red. Wrong behavior is wrong, right? It's the same stupid circular argument, a tautology. It's stupid, right? And calling it true? Out of the... What? It's completely misguided, man, right?
Thought that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon on his way to Rome.
Yeah, but, crossed... Okay, but then it's in the past. Even if it's a statement about the history, it's a historically dated statement. It's a statement from the history that points further back in history, right? If you say Julius Caesar is crossing the Rubicon, well, I'm not experiencing Julius Caesar, I don't think. And I don't think I'm experiencing crossing. And I don't think I'm experiencing Rubicon. And I don't know if there's a way to Rome here, right? So I don't fucking know, right? How can this be true? It can't. And crossed means it's not even in the sentence. It happened before the sentence, right? Supposedly. This is not about finding a good definition of what it means to be true and know and making good propositions and so on, a functional proposition. This is about blue stamping all sorts of stories about history and ethics and into being true without clarifying what you actually mean by true, right?
The thought that if you weren't watching this video right now, you'd be watching something else on YouTube. What could the facts that make these thoughts true be? We might be able to give some explanation of them, but it won't be either obvious.
No, but it's not that you can't deal with these kinds of statements. But you have to clarify what it is that potentially makes it a proposition. There has to be something in that is very clear, unambiguously settled, makes me able to settle whether or not this is a proposition or not. There has to be something, right? There has to be something addressed in the sentence that makes it a proposition, and it's very clear to me whether or not it's a proposition or not. Otherwise, don't throw these weird sentences at me in order to manipulate my mind to confuse me, basically, right?
Or intuitive. Moral truths would require existing moral facts. Facts.
So now, what can morality be facts? This moral realism, all this meta-ethic, no. It's compounding and compounding and compounding. We're bringing in morality now and history and, God knows what, man.
It's about the wrongness of torturing babies that somehow exist out there. Historical truths would require existing historical facts. If it is still true that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon on his way to...
But it's non-observational truth. But are you arguing for it, or are you trying to argue against it? Sometimes I'm not sure what you're actually arguing here. Are you bringing it up to pull it down, or are you bringing it up in order to say I'm in accordance with this kind of thinking? I'm lost in this. I don't know where we are going. What is the direction? It's like, okay, now I said that. Now I start to talk about something else. How does that connect with what you talked about 10 minutes ago and so on, right? It's very hard to follow this. And when when philosophies are this hard to follow, I am not buying it. I mean, you have to get back to the drawing board, create a way. I'm not trusting it, even if there's some of it I might say, okay, that's sort of decent. I may be on board with that, and whatever, right? It has to be fucking clear. It has to be I can't, it's so easy to understand this. I may not agree with it, but at least it's clear to me what is going on here. Then I would be much more likely to give it a shot, so to say, right? But this is all over the place. This is all the anecdotes of this, that, and the other, and all sorts of weird statements here, there, and everywhere, and 15 different terms used that are not defined, and so on, right?
Rome, it must still be a fact that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon on his way to Rome. As for truths about what you would otherwise be doing, these would require facts about circumstances other than those that happened. Maybe there are existing facts about possibility.
But these are imaginations, right? You can imagine all sorts of shit is going to happen in the next moment or not. That doesn't make it so, right? So it's also about past, present, and future, and where you can have knowledge and all that, right? These are much more interesting and, I would say, important aspects of thinking that you need to dive into in order to go about doing what you're doing here. Go do some foundational shit about time and space and ontology and metaphysics and so on, and get something that is really clear and understandable. And I'll listen carefully, right? But this is all over the place, right? This is the typical midstream academic mumbo jumbo, right?
But they aren't intuitive ones. And then there are truths that are either very general, metaphorical, or seem to involve strange kinds of objects. Consider the following. The thought that politics in the West has become increasingly polarised. The thought that a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. and the thought that the young man enlisted for the sake of the war effort.
Now, what he's doing here, in my opinion, is now my camera is starting to blow out the light. So I don't want, as long as it's not completely ridiculous, I'll let it be. But it seems like the more I push the levers on this webcam, the worse it gets, right? Okay, as long as you can see me decently, right? Or I can see a picture that looks like it is recorded decently, fine. But he is now pounding on you in order to confuse you, right? This is sort of a passive-aggressive tactics of throwing sentences at you, sort of to numb you a bit, right? It has no place doing that. After 26 minutes, all of this should be settled, right? And if you're very long-winded and talkative like I am, it might take an hour, right? But you're not throwing these sort of disconnected sentences at the listener. You can't do this, right? Non-observational truth. But what do you mean non-observational? Can it be true without me observing it? Who's settling that? I have to access something in order to get to that non-observational truth. And if I have to get to it, it must be some kind of observation then, right? It's self-contradictory statement to call something a non-observational truth, right? It's like saying that dog doesn't exist or something like that, right?
What fact could make it true that politics has become increasingly polarised in the West? Perhaps there are lots of facts involved, many involving social media posts and comments, but the thought clearly doesn't correspond to any of those facts. Thoughts about birds in hands and bushes aren't really about birds in either hands or bushes. But if there can be truths of this sort, it's hard to know what facts might make them true and how they correspond to the thought experience.
It's like you think that everything that you can possibly express in a sentence have to have some kind of truth value somewhere in it. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. There must be some truth in there somewhere, and I have to make a complete story about every statement possible and how much truth there is carried in it. No, it has to be binary, right? Because it's either, as you say, it's either true or it's false. It's not a scale. It's not a degree of something that is sort of 0% is false and 100% is true. And then sort of a gradation of this. No, it's binary. If it's not one, it's the other, right? And there's no middle ground of any kind. So you have to find something in your experience because you have to experience it. Otherwise, you can't claim it to be true, right? How can you claim something that you're not experienced to be true? That's ridiculous. That is stretching things beyond their limits because then anybody can claim anything, basically, right? And then you would have to follow that because they are truth carriers according to some standard, maybe, right? No, you have to be in control of what you know. You're the only one who can be in control of your knowledge, understand what you know. If you have to ask somebody else about knowledge, then they have to have access to knowledge. Then what's so special about them that they can have this knowledge and you have to go and ask them? No, everybody must be able to access their knowledge. Or what they can access can be knowledge, right? That's the only way. And it has to be binary because it has to be true or false according to your standard, also to my standard, right? Either I know it or I don't know it, right? Because we're making these propositions when we're trying to agree. So we can agree sort of on, we are 80% in agreement. It doesn't work, right? Either it's an elephant or it's not an elephant, right? I can't hunt down 60% elephant, right? It's misguided, this.
Expressed. As for thoughts like the one about the soldier, a straight reading of the fact involved would suggest there must be sakes out there in the world belonging to war efforts, and that in some cases people can do things for these sakes. After all, isn't that the kind of fact that would be needed to correspond to the...
but it's the one of the answers to a proposition is possibly, in some rare cases, or in maybe many more cases than you might think, that the answer is I don't know. You can't claim it to be true, but if you can't claim it to be true, it's not necessarily false. It could be false, but if you can't get to the experience of it, because it's not in your experience at the point, but it could possibly be, according to your own standards. If somebody says, well, I'm calling you on the phone here, and I'm looking at the Eiffel Tower, so the Eiffel Tower exists, well, I would have to say, I don't know, because it's not a part of my experience at the moment, but I would expect it to be if I was in the right placement, so to say, right? So I would have to say I don't know. If you're talking about out of space, but also out of time, if it's in the past, you can't know it, right? The young man enlisted, okay, I don't know. I'm not there, I wasn't there. And even if I was there, I'm no longer experiencing it because it's in the past. So I can say I have a memory of that might be fine. But that doesn't mean I know it, that's because I have a memory of it, right? A memory of something is not the same as experiencing something. There has to be strict delineations of what can be known and what can't be known. There is no strict delineations anywhere here. He's just throwing terms at you that could potentially be non-observational truths, right?
Thought and make it true. For most correspondence theorists, however, belief in things like existing sakes is uncomfortable. Now, I am not suggesting there are no potential responses to these questions by those that defend a correspondence account of truth. The point is only that the way to make this kind of theory work leads to places that are neither simple nor intuitive. Saying that truth is a matter of correspondence is not the end of the matter. It's only the start of a very long and difficult journey. It's got to the point now amongst academic philosophers that adherence to a correspondence theory of truth tends to mean the order of explanation gets reversed. We don't determine what is true by first going out and checking what the facts are. Rather, we use the truths that we know to determine what the facts are. This idea of using truths to determine what the facts are might seem really bizarre, but it's vital to understand for my argument as well as really interesting, so I'm going to slow down and take my time with this bit. Here goes.
Okay, so now we're backing up to ontology, right? But that's where you should start, man, right? It's like reading 2/3 of a book, and now I'm going to start with the introduction, right? Holy crap, man. Ontology is when you describe what there is, and what there is describing your experience, right? So all these terms you have been using in my list over there, these are basically descriptions of your ontology. So why didn't you start with that, right? Rather than spending 28 minutes confusing me, throwing all these terms at me, right? And famous philosophers and so on, right? Okay, we are past the 1 hour mark, right? So I guess I have only left to say I'll see you in the next one.